In this video, we are going to look at the final step in our workflow process as it relates to the work within our Excel software. Upon the completion of this step, we will be ready to actually import and transfer our data into the SPSS software, where we can perform our final bit of data cleaning and address issues such as the variable labels and value labels. However, at this point in our workflow, we have imported our delimited file. We have converted or recoded all of the verbal responses into our numeric responses, and the only items that we have remaining exist in our first row of cells, and the verbiage that is included in these cells corresponds to the actual questions that were asked. Now, depending on the origins of your file, this particular row may or may not exist. If this was a file that was prepared by an organization, it's possible that this top row doesn't exist. Instead, you may have a accompanying README file or codebook file that actually tells you what each column represents. And so in that situation, it would be your responsibility to, in a sense, actually go in, insert this top row, and then perform the same action that we're going to look at, which is actually begin to assign variable names within this top row. Now, as we begin to talk about and look at variable names, and by the time we've completed this video series, we will be able to recognize the difference between a variable name and a variable label. The label itself is the more detailed description. In many instances, and what we'll actually do is simply copy and paste the question from the survey and paste it as the label. And so when we conduct our analyses, that long detailed label is what will actually show up in our output. However, the variable name is actually what will appear at the top of our column headings when we import the data into SPSS. And again, because SPSS will look very much like a spreadsheet, in a sense, if you try to equate where these variable names will show up to what we see on an Excel sheet, essentially where we have columns labeled A, B, C, D, when we see the spreadsheet in SPSS, the variable names that we give will appear as the headings for our various columns. Now, as software has evolved, the rules that must be followed relative to variable names have loosened somewhat. However, as a standard practice, it is wise to keep variable names to 8 characters or less, and do not use any special characters except for the underscore symbol. So if you want to try to create an 8-character sequence that would normally include a space, we would actually insert an underscore character to represent the space. Now, as we go through and we begin to decide how we want to label these, again, much like some of the decisions between choosing 0 and 1 or 1 and 2 for yes, no, the naming is preference. It ultimately is, you want to choose a naming convention that will make sense to you, so that when you see these names in your data set, you will know what you're referring to. Now, if we were to look back, for example, at our survey, we could, for example, look at this first statement, which is going to be the first column in our data set, and we look at it and we see, oh, well, this is dealing with helping, and it's in the section of recruitment. So we could, for example, use the name REC, standing for that it's the recruitment section, underscore help. And so we would know that that's the recruitment section, the helping question. The next thing we could do is, again, maybe REC underscore FAM, standing for family. And so again, we could do that with each of those. Now, an alternative convention, and while we don't have actual numbers appearing beside our statements, we could, similar to what we did with the code book where we printed it out and we assigned our zeros and ones, we could come in and actually arbitrarily just list numbers down the side. So because I like helping other people would be item 1, because a family member or friend was also a nursing assistant would be item 2, and so on. Now, also notice that recruitment is labeled as section I. So we're in section 1 of our survey. So we could, for example, if we return to Excel and we go to that first column, and again, this is right now has the full statement of I like helping other people. As I mentioned, we could call this recruitment help. That would satisfy our 8 characters and seems to make sense. What we could also do is say this was our recruiting set of items, and this was the first one. We could also do something like this was the first section of our survey, so it was section 1, item 1. Okay, all of these would be acceptable ways of assigning variable names to that first item in that first section. Ultimately, the decision in terms of which one you wanted to use, again, it's up to you, but you want to make sure that you use a notation and a convention that is something that you can remember. And so let's say we kept the recruitment item 1. The next one will be recruitment item 2, and then we have recruitment item 3, item 4, item 5, item 6, and finally item 7. And so now, as we've addressed the first set, if we begin to look at the next section, we're in training. We have this initial issue about the training location. Now, again, we could simply start over and say TRAIN underscore, and we could start with 1 being the location, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, continuing into our rating scale. That would be okay, but admittedly, the notion of the section / item is probably most effective when you have sections that only consist of the rating scales, like we had with the recruitment section. In a situation where we have multiple items, we might want to reserve the train underscore 1 to our rating scale items. And so for our location or our training location, we might just simply come in and put location. And again, we know what it is, and of course the columns are in the same order, but also what we would want to do, just like before, where we came in and we wrote our code, our values down for our code book, we can also come off to the side, either in front or on the end, and put REC_1, REC_2. For the training question, come out and put location. So not only do we know here's the values and what they correspond to, but we know this particular question corresponds to this particular variable name in our data set. And so this is where that code book becomes very important as far as our process is concerned. And so as we come over to our data set, again, we can begin to fill out the rest of our information with the various variable names. And again, we can just continue all the way out until we get to our demographics, where we have things like how old are you. We can just say age. Are you 1 or 2? Notice this was actually something that got caught up in our recode. This was originally, are you male or female? So essentially we're asking gender. Are you Hispanic? We'll just put Hispanic, and then race, and then our last one is income. And so at this point, once we have finished out all these sort of in-between ones, we would be ready to essentially save and be able to close this data set. So all we would do is come up, and because we've already saved this as an Excel file, again, as soon as you get that comma delimited file imported, you want to go ahead and get it saved as an Excel file so that it's there, and you don't lose any work in case something gets hung up. You've already got that import. So now we just come up, we'll save it, and now we're saved with our most recent changes. And at this point, we've actually done everything we can do in Excel, and our next step would be to import this information into SPSS, where we can put the final finishing touches on our data set so that we'll be in a position to begin conducting our analyses.